You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. Could closure be what keeps us from learning how to live again? Join me for today's conversation. This episode contains adult subject matter and some listeners may be triggered by this content. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer. What if everything we've been told about holistic health, healing, and well-being is only part of the story? Because thriving in today's world looks different than it used to. Here, we challenge the narratives, rethink what it means to become human, and explore how that shapes the way we lead, live, and step into our full potential. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. We often feel pressured to find closure and leave our heartache behind. Yet true healing might actually lie in the opposite direction. What if the goal isn't to stop missing those we've lost, but to transform that pain into a lifelong practice of loving them in their absence? Thomas Attig holds a BA and PhD degrees from Northwestern University and Washington University in St. Louis. At Bowling Green State University, while chair, he and his colleagues established the world's first PhD program in applied philosophy. A fellow of the International Workgroup on Death, Dying, and Bereavement, he has received a Lifetime Achievement Award for Death Education from the International Network on Personal Meaning, Death Educator and Lifetime Achievement Awards from the Association for Death Education and Counseling, and the Robert Fulton Founders Award from the Center for Death Education and Bioethics at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. Let's meet Dr. Thomas Attig. Before we begin today's episode, we have a special invitation for you. Right now, you can go online and find 10 completely different ways of approaching health, healing, and well-being. One person talks about the body, another talks about energy, and someone else is focused on mindset hacks or relationships. And most of the time, those conversations never weave together. We are bringing together over 60 speakers across holistic well-being, including mind, body, emotions, energy, human potential, wealth, leadership, relationships, and more, to explore what it means to truly thrive in this world. Join us for the Holistic Wellbeing Summit from June 8th to 14th with speaker sessions and exciting live events. Get your free ticket now at holisticwellbeingsummit.com. And now, back to today's episode. Hi, Tom. It's great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because we will be talking about stigmatized loss and reclaiming the right to mourn it with honor. And what an important topic, I feel, especially in today's world, where we do have a lot of loss and grief that we're experiencing, and very often not very productive ways to manage all of this and to heal through it. So thank you for being here today and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me and welcoming me.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure. Yeah, I feel we have lots to talk about. Timely conversation.
I've been talking about it most of my life. My mother started reading letters that came from distant relatives where someone had died when I was about 4 or 5. And it wasn't that the letters came to the house and then she and my dad shared them and so on. She read them out loud to everybody. And they were large families. My dad was 20 years older than my mother. They started dying and they were working on farms, and sometimes there were accidents, and very vivid images came into my head when I was quite young, and she didn't pull any punches. Whatever was on the page is what she read. So I remember talking to my editor for the first book that I wrote, and her childhood experiences were nothing like that. She had never gone to a funeral until I think she was in her early 20s, and she was astonished by what I'd been exposed to. I didn't have any sense that I ever wanted to do any work having to do with death and dying. I just thought this is what happens to people in families. But eventually things moved me in that direction, and I think I was probably disposed more than I ever realized to be more comfortable than a lot of people are with a difficult subject matter and difficult experiences.
Yeah, it sounds like you were actually integrating death into your life from a very young age, which many families, death is still one of those taboo topics that doesn't get talked about very much, and especially how you manage that and live through that, all the feelings that come with that. So I find that talking about this and putting it out on the table and sharing that, is that, in your opinion, a healthier way to deal with this as a family rather than trying to stuff this under the carpet and just not talk about it so that these feelings don't come up?
I can't imagine that there's an advantage in ignoring a significant, real aspect of who we are for a lifetime and expecting it to come out better than bringing it to the surface and so on. I think I've got a pretty rich appreciation for human beings made to be ready to deal with anything that comes their way. The species wouldn't have survived and multiplied the way it did if we weren't made to be able to not merely absorb something awful that happens, but to find meaning in the lives that are shorter than we would like them to be, and find ourselves fully capable of continuing to not only miss people who have died, but to love them in separation. And people, how can you love somebody in separation? A simple exercise everybody can do with me right now. How many of you brought everyone you love who is alive right now with you, and they're sitting next to you as you're facing the screen and listening to me speak? Did you bring your husband with you today and he's sitting there in the room? All of your best friends are with you in the room? A couple of follow-up questions. When you left your husband behind today and came to the studio to have this conversation with me, did you stop loving him when you left? Do you think or suspect that he stopped loving you when you left? No, we must know something about how to love in separation. And if you think about it, most of the ways we love other people in our lives, we love them while we're apart from them. How do we do that? We remember them, we talk about them, we appreciate them, and are feeling grateful to them for lessons in life, or the meal that he cooked last night, or the surprises they brought into your life, or the best conversation you had last week. We do it all the time. And most every way that we love people when we are apart from them, when they're alive, we can do when they're dead. And when people figure that one out, it's a little bit easier. It still hurts, and usually at the beginning, it hurts awfully when someone has died, even if you could see it coming, unless they were in misery before they died. But we're really good at appreciating people who aren't with us, and we can do that for the rest of our lives. And I think the key transition that people have to make in grieving is from loving in presence to loving in absence. And we've had a lot of practice while they were alive. And I think once people want their agony and pain to stop, the missing and the sorrow and sometimes real agony of not being with them anymore can be quite a burden. But some people seem to hang on to their sorrow because they don't have the imagination to figure out how they can still love them while they're not here. And once they figure that out, there's a kind of easing of the suffering. And simple things to remember, the first time for everything can be the hardest, and the second time, and the third time, and the 15th time, and the 30th time get to be a bit easier each time. So you're at the beginning, you're probably experiencing the worst of what you're going to experience in your grieving. And there's better stuff to come unless you beat up on one another and really didn't have any kind of good relationship at all. But that's rare.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Actually, I've never looked at it quite the way that you've explained. So I find that fascinating that, yes, of course, we love an absence all the time and separation, and families live apart and we don't see our loved ones every day, and still our bond and our love for them continues. So I love what you have just shared. And it's a bit of a perspective shift, maybe, of how we look at grief when that first happens to us as well.
How we think of our relationships, and a lot that we do without thinking about it. When you think about it, it's pretty remarkable that we do it, and there's comfort to be had. I'm not saying wait for the next one to die and have a really good time because now you know how to enjoy it. That's not the point, but it doesn't end the relationship, and thank God it doesn't. And there's so much, and there are ways of returning to the relationship and taking care of yourself and taking notes or reminiscing or finding someone who really knew them well and talking together. There's a simple little story, not a simple experience, but in the early days of teaching about death and dying, I met up with lots of people in the community and so on. I met two couples, each of whom had experienced the death of a child. And they found it hard to find people to talk to about their experience. But they found one another, and the four of them started a support group. And Helen and Roger had two children, a 5-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl. And the 3-year-old girl was playing on a swing in the backyard, and she fell off the swing. She didn't break anything, but she aroused an incipient illness that was growing in her brain. And it was on a Friday when she fell, and she was dead by Monday. And it was startling, to say the least. She was a woman of faith, and she was looking forward to going to the church for comfort. And the priest reached out to her, offered his hand. She took his hand. He congratulated her for having a child in heaven, which is not something she welcomed. She said, if I could have mustered the energy, I would have clocked him on the spot. But I just went in and put up with it. And within a day or two, a woman who lived down the street from Helen and Roger had heard about the death. They hadn't been particularly close as neighbors, but their little girls played with one another. And the woman approached Helen and said, I noticed that we didn't really get to know one another very well, but our little girls really loved one another. And my daughter's hurting a bit now, and so on. And I watched our daughters playing together while your daughter was here. And in the process, I took a lot of photographs. I wondered if you'd just like to come down and we'll have coffee or tea, and we can look at the photographs together. Would you like that? If so, please come. She said it was the best thing anybody did, because the rest of the world didn't want her to talk about her dead daughter, and they didn't know what to say. And this woman just instinctively knew, look, I loved your daughter, not the same way you did, and I know how much this has to be hurting because I look at my daughter and think, what if this had happened to her? And she was full of sympathy and care and grace, and they became fast friends. She wasn't with her daughter anymore, but she was enjoying her daughter again, and she could see how much her daughter was enjoying life with her good friend down the block. Things like that are things that you can do rather than, oh, I'm afraid I might scare her, or I might do something stupid like that priest. But you just open up and share your heart with someone else and share the joy of seeing this little girl enjoying her best friend on the block and so on. The world is full of surprises that you can open to if you can reach past the depth of the sorrow. And unfortunately, you have to sometimes reach past silence because nobody knows what to say, so they choose to say nothing, which is almost the worst thing you can do.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because that very often happens even in families where family members don't know what to say to each other over the death of a loved one or a family member. And that silence can create a lot of isolation And as everyone is experiencing the death of that shared loved one that they had.
It can even be misperceived as deliberately hurtful, or she must resent me in some way, otherwise we'd be talking. And that could be a complete misinterpretation. But what else are you going to make of the silence? If you don't speak what you're thinking and what you're feeling, people will have an easier time misinterpreting you and misunderstanding you and maybe even resenting you. When the last thing you wanted to do was create resentment. You thought maybe this is the best I can do given that I don't know what to say. Another easy thing to say is, I don't know what to say, but I don't want to leave you alone in your sorrow. If there's some way we could get together and just have a cup of coffee and sit silently, if that's the best thing, let's do that. But I want you to know I care. And some people just don't do that very easily. And if someone is really uncomfortable with what you're doing, most of the time they'll be pretty honest. No, I don't want to do that. Or what you just said is bothering me a little bit. Let's talk about it. Let's get straight, because I know you're not trying to hurt me. And then it turns out, yes, I was trying to hurt you. I've resented you for years. And if I can really hurt you now while you're grieving, I can make it really wonderful for me anyway. Terrible for you. That'll be fine. Thank God there aren't people out there who behave that way. Not many, anyway. Present leadership of the world accepted, of course.
Yes. Yeah, that's another good point. Yeah, I felt very often when I was experiencing my own grief that there were moments, and mostly this was early on, just right after the loss, where I felt almost incapable of even accessing or expressing what I was feeling at the time. And I felt frozen, and I would consider myself a fairly emotionally intelligent person to some degree, but in those moments, I was not even capable if people were asking me, how are you doing? And it's, oh, I don't know. I don't feel anything. So is there a way that we can help ourselves also to come back into our body and to reconnect with our emotions at some point as we're going through this? Because I feel that there can be a lot of disconnection that happens to ourselves in grief as well.
Another heart-to-heart book a long time ago is called Catching Your Breath in Grief. And it breaks down into 3 parts. And the first is breathing into life, which we do from the very beginning. And we don't do it deliberately. Our little lungs take in the air, and people take us to places where we can breathe in good air and be comforted and taken care of. And we can't say exactly what we want because we don't know how to speak. We make noises that send signals, and people try to pick up what's going on. And eventually we become self-conscious, but long before that, we really do make ourselves at home in the world and in life with others. Some life circumstances are a lot worse than others, and some are just very fortunate. But we breathe into life and make ourselves at home, and then a loss takes your breath away. It's as if you've been punched in the gut and you can't take in enough that you need. And you have a sense that the change that's come into your life is not a small and insignificant one, even if it's a 3-year-old tiny little creature dying. This is momentous. And the momentum that I've had in my life is not taking me where I thought I was going anymore. And the shape of my daily life it's in shambles, and I'm not connecting very well with the environment that was comfortable and safe for me, and I'm having a hard time with other people. I need an appreciation of how momentous this is. I don't look any different, but my daily life can't be what it was, and the future that I'd been anticipating and planning for and setting myself up for, preparing for, is going to have a major figure missing. It's not going to be the future I've been living toward and expecting and planning for, or even automatically without thinking of it on a momentum into. So much has happened all at once that you can't breathe normally. And you have a sense you got to slow down. I need the world to be patient with me because I need to be patient with myself. I'm not going to put this together all at once. It looks to me like I could be spending in lots of ways the rest of my life living with the death of my mother or the death of my child or the 3 who were killed in the fire, or that terrible thing that happened in the classroom at the school nearby, and so on. And then the last part of the book is catching your breath in grief. And it's breathing back into a more normal rhythm in daily life, but different than what it was. And in relationships in different ways. And some people you counted on, turns out that was mistaken. And some people surprised you, like the lady down the street who you didn't know very well. And one of the things you have to do is use whatever skills you've developed in sorting out who it's safe to be with, who it's desirable to be with, and some new skills perhaps you have to develop. And you have to be patient with yourself. And some people aren't going to be very safe to be with, so avoid them and find allies. There's almost no aspect of your life that isn't potentially going to be difficult. And there are going to be welcoming places and welcoming people and surprising availability of resources where you happen to live in your hometown or in the neighborhood. Some people will disappoint you, some people will surprise you, and just a huge amount of change. The world will help you if it just lets you slow down and take your time and ask for some more time at work. And if you got challenging children, and if you got somebody else in the family who's pretty good with the children, and you're more affected than some other folks, let somebody else do some of the work that you're used to doing. And my idea of grieving is a process of relearning how to live in the world, given what this major change has brought into your life. I remember at the time I was introducing that idea, the thought about grief and loss was the thought about all the difficulty that comes into your life and all the sorrow that comes in. And people were very concerned about taking care of you because you're not capable of taking care of yourself. That's wrong. But you really do need to have people slow down because you're going to be learning how to do things at home, out among other people, at work, wherever you're living. It's going to be changed in some way. Your whole world is changed. And people withdraw in part because they're just not ready to do everything at once. And they need the world to be patient. And sometimes you have a boss at work. Look, you got the 3 days off for the funeral period. You should be okay now. No, I'm just getting started with dealing with a major change in my life, and please be patient with me. I think I'll be a better worker eventually, but right now I could use a little bit more time off or less stress at work and so on. Now, I've been rambling a little bit, but the idea that we breathe into life automatically. We're made to do that. We're made to make ourselves at home here with the support of reasonable parents and family and so on. And most of it we do unself-consciously. We learn to like the food that we eat, but it's not like a lesson that someone has to teach you and you write it on the blackboard until you get it right. Sandwich, more sandwich. Feed me. Most of our learning how to live in the early years is not anything intellectual. Our minds are made to do all kinds of things automatically. And if we're supported by good family, parents, friends, whatever, we breathe into a pretty full life before we even have the capacity to think about what we're doing. And an awful lot of writing in psychology and so on assumes that we've become sophisticated, self-aware animals. Most of what we do, we're not particularly self-aware of. All right. And we get better at it. And I'm not saying that when you're self-aware and self-conscious and articulate about what you're doing and so on, that's optimal human functioning. But sometimes it's necessary and it adds the gravy that makes the dish work. But relearning how to live in the world, I ask simple questions when I have an audience. Your audience is maybe the 6 of them who are listening. I'd ask just a couple of simple questions. I love doing this. If I have a couple of hundred people in the audience, I'll say, raise your hand if you have finished learning how to live well. I've never had anybody raise their hand. Right. How many of you think you're going to stop loving the person who's died? Anybody? No hands. How many of you think you're going to stop missing them? No. Then why do you think closure is a good idea in grieving? Because you would be finishing loving them, you'd be finishing missing them. Unrealistic. You learn to put these challenging parts of your life in perspective and in the bigger package, where with the people who are still with you, you do what you can with people you are with that you love and they love you. And when some of them die and are no longer on the scene, you can still do all kinds of things that still matter. You can be grateful. If you can move from sorrow to gratitude, that's a reasonable target, and you can get there because you've got what you need. You've got the good memories. You've got the influence that has made you the better person you are because you had that wonderful mother or that good best friend or the father who surprised everybody in the lessons in gratitude he taught you, and so on. We are given resources to live with on this planet and with other people that are incredibly rich. Some people live in more and more difficult circumstances, and some are living in unenviably terrible circumstances. But a lot of that can be overcome, eradicated, improved, depending on how well you connect with the people that are available to connect with. But I think the awfulness of grief is, I think, sometimes misdirected at expectations that are not going to be fulfilled. You're not going to forget this person. You're not going to stop loving. You're not going to stop being the better person that you are because they influenced you and moved you in good directions. And most everybody that I meet, even with terrible losses, have things that they still cherish about the relationship with the person who has died. And that's not going to change unless you lose your mental capacities, which some people do toward the end of their lives. One side of my family was the family that almost everybody ended in dementia in their late 80s and into their 90s. And on the other side, they had strokes and heart attacks, and they never got to that point. So there are differences. I'm old enough so that people start into dementia at my age fairly commonly. And so far, knock on wood, or knock on wood, it's not happening. I think if you write a book, you have to keep your wits about you. But I don't know, maybe the middle chapters might have some confusion that's a giveaway on how old I am.
I feel if you keep learning and you keep writing, definitely that will keep your brain active.
So far, one of the things that I resent just a little bit is I've been a piano player all my life, and I don't play really fancy stuff, but I do playing ragtime, and the rhythms are a little bit complicated. And it turns out in my family, some of us are blessed with what they call essential tremor. And so my hand doesn't stay steady. It's like that. And if you're typing on a computer, that's difficult. You get triple letters and so on. You have to do a lot of proofing. And on the piano, the last couple of years, I haven't been playing the piano because there's just too much tremor. And I think once I'm done with all the podcasting and so on, I'm going to get with a physician who will adjust the medication so I can go back to playing the piano.
I feel that our own passions and your piano playing, for example, are also pieces that can help us find some healing in our grief, and maybe also things that connected us with our loved ones that have passed away, that things we used to share together or do together. There's one family member I used to do puzzles with, or we have these activities that, of course, after you do them by yourself, but still there's this connection to when you're doing them of thinking about the memories and the love that you have that you shared with that person. So yeah, I feel that's definitely part too.
I'm thinking about my mother who died 20 years ago, and she played the piano in her family of 9, and they used to sing together through the Depression and into the 40s and 50s family gatherings I remember being part of. And She made it through high school. She wasn't unintelligent. I've written some things, and there were a number of times when she would read the whole thing. And she'd tell me that she finished reading the whole thing. And she said, I'm not sure that I understood much of what you were writing about. And my prose isn't terribly difficult, but just an intellectual book as opposed to a novel for her was just heavy going. But she always expressed her appreciation. But when I could sit down and play the piano, and she was her family's piano player, she just loved it. And I feel connection to my mom in all kinds of ways. And for years and years, she died 25 years ago now, I would play the piano and I'd feel close to mom. And I can't play the piano now. And that feels like there's a distance from mom that wasn't there before. And that kind of change in what you're able to do as you're growing has to be a part of a lot of grieving persons' experiences. And notice that what's happening there is the feeling close to a woman who died 25 years ago because of she encouraged you to take those piano lessons. She resented me when I stopped taking the piano lessons and joined bands and played the trombone because I got more out of social music making than solo music making. And then when I got done with bands in my 20s, I went back to playing the piano. And I wish I'd taken more piano lessons and squeezed both the social music making and the solo music making into a more complete life. But this tremor that I have, I'm not like that. There's just enough so I don't hit the notes the way I should. It's affecting my relationship with my mother 25 years after she died. I'm really very good at relating to friends and family. And I think that's part of what happened when I was growing up. I had these nests of very large gatherings. A lot of my cousins wanted to be off beating one another up out in the yard for good times. And I like listening to the old folks. And by the time I was a teenager, if one of my friends was having a tough go, they wanted to talk with me. I had no idea that I was ever going to be a professional caregiver, but I think my teaching turned out to be something like that. And it had to do with my left eye has never been better than 2400. So it's just peripheral vision. And this is my reading eye, which has been quite good, but very slow. Mom would say, I'm around the house and I'm 7 or 8 years old. Why don't you read a book? That was not comfortable for me. I would ride on my bicycle around town until I found someone to play with. And I had decent social skills by the time I was 12 years old in the 7th grade. And I think all of those experiences where you don't really know where they're going to lead wind up combining to nudge you in a certain direction. I was super smart as a math. I had perfect scores on required exams to get into universities and offers to enter into engineering. And that didn't have anything to do with interacting with people. So I wound up dropping math and going into the humanities so I could have conversations that were interesting the rest of my life. And it turned out just wonderfully.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And wow, you shared some really insightful stories. And I feel a lot of our listeners can relate to the things that you've experienced, and especially around feeling close to our loved ones who have passed on and feeling connection or distance depending on what's happening in our lives. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you a little bit about fear, because a lot of the times when someone passes away, especially someone we were close to, we begin to maybe confront our own mortality a little more than we might usually when we're just living life and thinking about other things. Sometimes that brings up a lot of uncomfortable feelings when we think of, how long do we still have and what might happen to us, especially if our loved ones suffered from some kind of debilitating illness or something that really makes that very much front of mind. A lot of the times in that comes up the fear of dying, or the fear around suffering, or the fear around pain. And it can be very intense, and some people don't find their way back out of that. That stays with them, and they lose that joy in life and that ability to actually move through the grief. So you've worked with a lot of people and you've had your own experiences. And how do you work with something when that happens and we become locked into that fear? We become locked into grieving, and we cannot seem to move through that at any point. How do you work with that?
I think people get caught in the idea that grief is the difficult stuff that comes into our life when someone we know dies. It's a flood of sorrow or suffering kind of rolls over you, and you had no choice in that. That's been reacting to what's happened is choiceless, and things being choiceless for choosing creatures is very difficult, hard to put up with that. And I'll just tell you something. When I had been teaching death and dying for about 5 or 6 years on my campus in Ohio, I had an unusual invitation from a dormitory on campus. And they wanted me to come and deliver something that has come to be known as the last lecture. Would you come, and given the course that you've been teaching, would you share with us what you would want people to understand about what you've learned in this course you've been teaching, as if it were your last chance to explain it all, make sense to others what you've been experiencing in doing this. And there were 3 of us who were speaking that night. One of them was in a television program, and she talked about learning to produce a good TV program. And I thought, with your last breath, you would actually speak about that? I was just surprised. I think she misunderstood the assignment. I took it seriously. All right, here you are, you're 30 years old, and you've been teaching this course for 5 years. And now you've just learned that you're not going to be teaching that course next year because you're going to be dead. What do you want to say? The strange thing, but it worked out. I had collected cartoons and quotations and inspiring passages and so on. I had a whole bunch of these things clipped and in a shoebox. And I got them out and I organized them. And I finally called my talk Fragile Humanity, Handle with Care. That's our humanity. And I said, there are difficult things that I've been teaching about in this class. And I'll just boil it down to 4. There may be 5 or 6 I could have done. And I said, 4 questions. Is being small and insignificant okay? Is being subjected to constant change, unrelenting change, everything changes, nothing stays the same, is that okay? Suffering. We all suffer. Is that okay? What about not knowing what you really wish you knew? Is that okay? And I said, I'm coming to learn that my fellows engage with these 4 aspects of our fragility in ways that differ from me, but we all differ in how we deal with these things. And it's not a good idea to persist in living in a way that suggests that you strongly believe none of these is okay. Because if it's not okay, then the kind of being that you are isn't okay. And it must be terrible to live in the skin, in the embodiment of someone where being that way is just intolerable. And I said, I believe that counselors' couches or discussions around a round table in a counselor's office where someone is insisting that any one of these things is not okay, is living with telling themselves that who they are is chronically not okay. And that cannot be a good way to live a human life. What if we together in the room, as I'm giving this talk, we think about what can be marvelous about small? What can be marvelous about something you learned from your suffering and things not coming out the way you really want them? What can be adventurous, perhaps, about uncertainty and not knowing? How can, Do we resent roses because they only bloom for a couple of days? No. How do we do with sunrises? How do we do with a sled ride? How do we do with turning the light on for the rest of the evening? There are lots of small things that are wonderful. And I said, I think counselors' couches and offices are filled with people who are doing their very best to find unacceptable stuff that's the heart of who we are. Nobody gets to live forever. Nobody gets to live without suffering. Nobody gets to live bigger than the universe, or even their own neighborhood, or even their own home, or even their own bedroom. All right, we're small. And compared to some things, we're gigantic, but compared to other things, just take your average galaxy. And where are we? We're in a tiny little corner somewhere. And I said, look, it seems to me that the more we can do to appreciate that we're incredibly fortunate to have any life at all, even if it doesn't last longer than you. And I'm getting old enough now that I now and again have thoughts about, I've lived several decades, and right now it's looking like it's smaller than I thought it was. And if I'd been asked 50 years ago, what do you think it's going to be like when you're my age? I would have said, oh man, if I'm lucky enough to live that long, just imagine what I'm going to have the opportunity to do, to learn, to see, to hear, to feel, and so on. I think if we, in grief in general, and in particular on this bigger scale that I'm talking about, more we can do to find our way ourselves, or to find support from others, or inspiration from others who maybe told their stories or written their books or developed their theologies or whatever, the more we can learn how to move from sorrow to gratitude, the better we're going to live. And when you sit and just think about it, it is so remarkable that you and I, continents apart, can have a conversation like this about how to live a life and how to face the harder stuff. And most of that harder stuff doesn't last nearly as long as the good stuff. And there are ways of softening the hard stuff. So if we can take care of one another when grief comes into our lives, so we can move from the depth of sorrow into what we still have the opportunity to be grateful for, that's what you want to inspire people to do with their grief. And I think it's possible and highly desirable. That's my 10 cents in a little lecture that I gave almost 50 years ago with the help of good cartoon. I wish everybody who's hearing this that you can find your way from the depth of sorrow that almost paralyzes you into recognizing what you still have of the person who died to be grateful for, and what you still have a life in your surroundings that are holding things, waiting for you to enjoy them. If you can get past the sorrow and get to the gratitude for what you had and what you still have, so the sorrow doesn't get in the way of your lighting up again in the wonderful environment where we all are, imperfect though it is. It's so much better than no environment at all and no opportunity to live at all. And people are still puzzling, how is it that this biochemical mass that we are turns out to be this much alive? All right. If you can keep focusing on that and keep cherishing what you still hold of the people who are no longer with you, I'm sure you can live a pretty darn good life until the lights go out.
Yeah. I love these perspective shifts. I love how you are showing us just these different angles of how we can approach grief and how we can, I want to say, help ourselves through this journey as well. Because, yeah, sometimes we get stuck in grief and it can actually take a long time to find our bearings. And as you said, find this way to live again in our lives when these big changes have happened. So, yeah, thank you for sharing these. I feel this is so valuable as our listeners might be going through their own grief journeys, or maybe anticipating somebody who is ill, who may be passing away soon, or very unexpectedly in accidents that happen and where we are just not prepared for it at all. So yeah, thank you for that. And I want to ask you, Tom, if our listeners are experiencing their own grief, their own loss, and they would like to connect or find out more about what we've talked about today, how can they connect with you? And what kind of programs, services, or resources do you have available for our listeners to connect with you?
Easiest thing is to get hold of a book. And there is a coupon where you can get it for 30% off from my publisher. And it's called Seeking Wisdom in Death's Shadows. And it collects my writings. The first one in here was written in 1982. And it was about the kind of selves we are when we grieve. And we're not self-contained atoms floating nearby with no connection with one another. We're more like webs interconnected in a great web of webs that connects everything to everything. And it's about grief and personal integrity and how it's shaken when part of the web is sliced out, but you're still connected in all kinds of ways. The book is of interest to scholars because people have found my stuff to be valuable in those circles. But it's also kind of a intellectual biography of me figuring out how to live and how to think about grief and how to live a finite life with integrity and meaning. And it's not all scholarly writing. There's an essay in there on sorrow-friendly practices and how to attend to your aches and pains and psychological challenges and take care of yourself. And it's a testament to what I was just talking about at the end. Grief is not about just reaction, about which we have no choice. These things just come into our lives, but grief response. And we are made to find our way to good consequences in difficult circumstances, where we have whole lifetimes that we've come to know and know well, that we can continue to treasure and benefit from having known. It's an optimistic book when it comes down to it. And it's about how this, in a nutshell, just sounds too simple, but it's really what it's about. When you think about how to live a human life, we do not find happiness in living more or less scientifically. We find the good in life by living more or less wisely. And I became a philosopher because philosophy is about the love of wisdom. And you can call yourself a philosopher as a seeker of wisdom without bragging that I've heaped gobs and gobs of wisdom on myself. All right, you don't have to be pretending that you've become terrifically wise, but there's no shame at all in saying, I really want to be as wise as I can be. It's a good path to walk. And it's what you need to do when you're grieving. No scientist is going to give you a formula that's been quantitatively analyzed, and there's a 63% chance that if you do this, you're going to succeed in life and find happiness, and so on. That's a good starting place. And there's Petra as a coupon that you can get that tells you how to get 30% off if you want to buy that book. And I wish you all well. I'm happy to speak with grieving people because I know the possibilities are good. And I've tried to capture as many as I've learned about in the little book.
Amazing.
And I appreciate the opportunity that Petra has given me to speak with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been my pleasure. And of course, we will link to all of Tom's offerings in the show notes as well. So we will link you to his book, Seeking Wisdom in Death's Shadows. And those are collected writings on how we grieve. And as Tom just mentioned, we also have a coupon code for you that you'll find in the show notes as well for the discount on the book. So we'll link those together for you. And we will also link you to Tom. And if you'd like to connect or you'd like to talk about grief with him or loss with him, because that's something that you might be experiencing, then please reach out and connect with him. and share your journeys with us on the podcast as well. We always want to hear how our listeners are connecting with our guests and the magic that happens from that. And of course, the hope that comes from that as well, knowing that we can work through grief and we can actually have a life that's still fulfilling after, and still love our loved ones that have passed on and stay connected to them. So I really appreciate you being here, Tom, today and sharing your wisdom on this topic with our listeners and with me. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Everyone, thanks for tuning in. I hope this episode has inspired you in some way in your own journeys. And take care, everyone, and be well. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejorni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.